Musselman. Hi, everyone. My name is Corey Musselman from Leidos. Pleased to introduce the panel today on evolving cyber protection for the computing ecosystem. Panel moderator for today is Ms. Patrice Wilmot, the Chief of the Cyber Services line of business. Hope you enjoy.
Thank you. So I guess before I get started, how many of you were in the earlier session for the ecosystem? Okay, I'm just trying to figure out what everyone's aware of. So this afternoon, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're doing in the cyber services line of business, and then follow on will be a panel discussion. I'm fortunate to have three panel members, all representing different areas of DISA. So I have Dave Nameroff. Wave your hand, Dave. Dave, who's running the Cybersecurity Services portfolio. He's in the Operations Center. Jim Travis is on the left side, and he's the Cyber NetOps Solutions Division Chief. And then I have Michael Sandell, who's the Deputy Server Line of Business for the ecosystem. So we will get to these guys and have the opportunity to explore things I talk about a little further. So, first off, I hate having to stand still, so it's going to have to, I'm just bearing with it. But we recently stood up an ecosystem, I guess January 8th of this year. And we did that to help us streamline the way we delivered services to our customers in the thing that used to be called DEX and now called data centers. I was fortunate to be chosen to be one of those leaders, and so I took on the cyber services line of business. So within our line of business, we deal with the operations, the business side, money, resources. So we really have all the authority to get things done in that line of business. So I just wanted to give that as a little bit of a background for folks who weren't here earlier. And when I've been given three real tasks here: to do it faster, cheaper, better. So we're going to talk about some of the things we're doing to evolve ourselves from the way we used to do business to the way we're doing business now. Some of that will include really some of the things we need from industry. And really, there's also things that we need for our mission partners to help us with. So I will be hitting on those things. Do I hit the next? Figure out how to do this myself. So from the ecosystem perspective, my line of business is a little unique because I have things that resided in what was previously known as DEX, but I also provide services to DISA programs. So I'm really a DISA service provider, and I'm also a service provider for things that we host in our data centers, or what used to be the data centers and is now the ecosystem. So you kind of get a thought here, and this chart's really trying to depict, the mobility, cloud services, network. You also have computing. All of those things are really falling into the oversight of the cyber services line of business. Let me go to the next slide. So one of our primary focuses is really moving away from what we really think of as compliance into a risk management framework. So you kind of see here where we're talking about how do we know that we have a threat out there. So identification, that could be in the form of a new acquisition. There could be some external threat that just occurred, or we could be dealing with a change in our environment. So we're tasked with the job of really assessing that threat, figuring out what's the impact of it, what's the likelihood of it actually affecting our environment, and getting that information out to the people who need to know. So when I think of this, one of the primary things we're really focused on is speed. How fast can we know something's occurred, and how fast can we notify someone to take action? And if you think about the way the world's evolving, this becomes extremely important in our environment. So we're hosting many applications, and we're continually dealing with those types of threats, vulnerabilities within the environment. So we're always active in that sense. How do we mitigate those things? So Michael Sandell here is going to talk a little bit about some of the mitigations we're doing within our environment today to deal with patching, how fast can we patch, how we're managing applications, what are those things that we're doing to evolve ourselves to really address risk quicker. And finally, monitoring and reporting. So and some of you might know about the risk management framework, but one of the primary objectives of the risk management framework is really that continuous monitoring piece. And I know people are always asking, what does continuous monitoring mean? How do we do that? So first, we're identifying, selecting controls, implementing controls within that environment, and then we're monitoring to make sure the vulnerabilities or threats that are affecting our environment are still being managed from a risk-based perspective. So detection and response, this is another area, and a lot of you have heard of CSSP. I've got Dave Nameroff here, who's the expert in this area. But this is an ever-evolving area. We've mainly been focused quite a bit in the past on the protections and detection response based at the boundary level. We are moving that, and Dave's doing a lot of work here so that we're really getting more focus on applications and reducing the risk of those applications, detecting changes or anomalies that affect our applications. So this is really a big space that we're moving toward from a service perspective, moving it away from focus on the boundary, really down to that application so that we know there's an issue, we know how to resolve it, and how to attack it quickly. Monitoring, auditing, reporting. So as we stood up the ecosystem, this was really my number one priority because I was looking at divergent methods from across all the things that used to be called decks or data centers. We had to determine a single way for us to assess holistically what was going on in the ecosystem. So we have moved away from looking at things based on location. Now we're doing assessments on the program. And we're able to provide those results very quickly and get that information out to the program office or mission partner affected. So reporting, every year we do an audit of our environments. We mainly have been focused on our financial systems, but I'm sure most of you are probably aware, besides what we call our SSA 618, that's focused on PhysCam controls. We also have CCRIs and various things that allow us to do those annual types of assessments. So let's talk a little bit about transition. And this is really, I think, one of the more important things as we talk to industry and our mission partners. Where are we going? And how can you help us get there? So again, I mentioned earlier, moving away from compliance-based management to risk-based management is critical in our environment. We need to be able to understand what risks are out there, determine what to do about those risks, and be able to respond quickly. One of the things that during my experience as a cyber service provider, there are more than one occasion that I've had a customer call me and know that something happened to their application before we did. We need to move away from that. We need to understand, again, what those risks are and be able to isolate it and do something about it. That's very much key to where we're going. I mentioned real-time risk assessment. We have a lot of tools today, but when we're able to know what's happening in the real time, what exploits are occurring, and we're able to address those quickly, that's really when we're going to meet that objective and be able to respond quickly to those threats that are occurring. And I mean, we know they're getting more sophisticated. I'm thinking about it. So I know everybody's brought up WannaCry. But that was a risk, and we were able to respond quickly, figure out what assets were affected, and do something about that in record time. I can tell you, it's probably one of the largest success stories I've seen in a long time when we were able to do something and know what the impact in our environment was. I mentioned application level protections, and we're definitely going to explore that more. Secure cloud offerings. This is an area where DISA is really driving. How do we work in the cloud? How do we protect the cloud? I think Dave will go into a little more of that as we move through this. And then I know later this afternoon, or I think tomorrow, one of my colleagues will be talking a little more about multifactor authentication and things like EPOS and that we're using in the ecosystem today. So I've got a few questions I'm going to present to the panel, and then really the goal is to be interactive and have a conversation. And I'm really looking for you to help us and ask questions so that we can really get you the information you need or want to know about what we're doing in our environment. So let's see, our first question. So this is going to start with you, JT, and Dave, you can chime in afterwards. Have we evolved our abilities to gain a more holistic view of our systems?
Again, thank you for including me today, Patrice, and thank you all for joining us. It's really good to see a lot of interested people who are looking at us from a variety of perspectives. We're, in the end, looking for help from everybody here to create a better, more sustainable solution for our nation's warfighters. So, on evolving our capabilities, we had to start from ground zero. And what we did was we began with a DISA-wide audit of all the cybernet ops capabilities. I use the term cybernet ops because it looks at bringing together the defensive cyber ops solutions, the analytic solutions, and the net ops solutions, and says, let's look at that as a unified whole. So the first thing we did in the agency was said, the boundaries at the solutions level, the tools level between those three areas, those boundaries should go away. We should look at them from a unified perspective. And that was the first step we had to do, was now recognizing there may be different workforces, different places, different missions, but there ought to be a unified set of capabilities that we use to do that. So the first step was to audit to find out what we actually had. And we had a lot of great help from a lot of people, to include Patrice's team and Dave's team, to do that. Once we finished that, we then began a separate audit to identify across the agency what were the functions that people performed to defend, to operate, to program manage, and to analyze what was going on, so that we had an audit of the systems. We audited the work functions, so we would do everything that somebody had to do. And then once we did that, we then linked those capabilities to the applications that were supported. Because obviously, cybernet ops exists to help you manage the services we provide the agency. In this case, Michael is one of the customers of the solutions we provide. Once we did that, then we crafted an integrated architecture. We talked about it in my presentation this morning, and you can download the slides from the NetOps brief this morning to kind of see what we've provided. And once we had that converged architecture, we then were able to come up with what were the things that were duplicative, and then looked at establishing a program that sunsets some of the tools, expands slightly the others, so that we had a unified set of solutions. So from the perspective of a holistic view, the first thing DISA did was essentially audit our solutions, audit our functions, identify what we had, and then look for what were the best-of-breed solutions we had, and then are moving so that everybody has the same view, the same tools, so your solutions become integrated. And as a result, instead of having to look at one screen for your compute application, and another screen for your network, and another solution for your comm line of business. The end state, I mean, we've already started moving that way with our ticketing solution, and our performance management solution is probably leading the way in that. And it will be a 3-year effort to get a holistic view so that one person can see everything, not necessarily one screen of glass, but it will be an integrated set of panes they look at, where we couple that with the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures. Especially Dave will be leading to help pull this off. So Dave, what else would you like to add to that ideas?
That's a tough act to follow. One of the things we've been working on is, as JT alluded to, we started from a whole bunch of different places, different funding lines, different organizational structures, different ways of approaching the problem. And in addition to trying to get a clear perspective on the tools themselves, we have to also build that same sort of perspective on the organizations and the people that are doing this, and get away from I'm a network security guy, so I look at network tools. I'm a server security guy, I got to look at server tools. Looking at more holistically from the security aspect of the end-to-end, understanding that the adversaries that are doing this are also trying to they're exploiting the boundaries between all those things, so we essentially have to remove those boundaries. We have to remove them from the tools JT just referred to. We also have to remove that from the practices, the organizations, and even the way things are, understanding how the funding ties together and the resourcing ties together, so that I may have disparate sources. I end up with one operational service approach that unifies that and gives value to all of those different resource stakeholders.
Thank you. So, Mike, what capabilities are we deploying for rapid patching, and how can industry help in this area?
So we're looking at automation for rapid patching and how we can patch, again, better, faster, cheaper. We're looking at tools in our inventory today that allow us to schedule patches in off time. One of the big issues is the depth and breadth of operating systems that we support, from your typical Windows to old Windows, 2000, 2003, Red Hat, but then the outliers like AIX, HPUX. We kind of cover a depth and breadth there. And patching those is a sort of a threefold effect, knowing what you have to patch, knowing that patching is not going to affect the application, and then actually applying the patch. We have experience across 12,000 environments to know if it's affecting things. We'll learn early on, and so that's a key benefit to having a larger enterprise. We find that it's tough to find one tool that fits all for whether it's patching or configuration or anything like that. And what we're really looking for is sort of tool agnostic abilities to configure and patch. Plug and play scripting, if you will, that allows us to fluidly move across these various platforms. We run on different networks, and so it's not always connected via a common network. So generally one suite doesn't fix all. Right now we have several, depending on which environment we're working in, is the tool set we're using. One of our issues that we do face, though, is that ability to patch quickly. Permissions to patch, getting mission partner approval, patching quickly. Technically, you can patch right away. So then it becomes more of an issue of what are you going to break if you patch right away.
Thank you, Mike. Let me ask Dave this. How are we increasing our application protection, Dave, in your space?
So one of the things in application protection, remember I mentioned before, we had a bunch of network guys that said, I look at stuff outside on the network as it's going by on the network. I got some other guys that are looking at the individual servers. At the application level, you're really looking at what's happening across all those domains and understanding which parts of it are already being done today by system administrators, by net assurance folks, and then looking at how do you meet the gaps and how do you cross those so that I have a clear picture of what's happening within the application, what's happening from inside the application because of the network traffic I'm seeing, what's happening inside the application because of what may be happening on the host from the standpoint of HBSS or other similar tools, and integrating that together into one coherent picture so that we can then use that to figure out what's actually going on with an application so that system owners and application owners understand if there's an issue, what the issue is with their application, and what they need to do about it.
Thank you. And Mike, what do you think in your space?
So a big part of the application security is in knowing what applications you have and what their base is, whether it's a Java or one of the web applications. And configuration management is so important in this, in knowing what you have, where you have it. It's vital.
Would agree. So Dave, I mean, you're doing a lot of work in the area of Cybersecurity Service Provider. And I know you've talked about that some today. But can you talk a little more about how we're evolving there from a cloud perspective, applications, because we're definitely going into new territory now.
So as some of you may remember, some of you were at the discussion earlier this morning. One of the things we're finding with cloud is that we're not getting the same kinds of control over the infrastructure and control of the environment that we're used to having when we had our own data centers, our own equipment, and things like that. It's forcing us to look at some different ways and looking at the security different to focus more on the access issues to the application, the use of the data, who's getting access to what are they doing with it. The real goodness in looking at this approach differently is I can now use this then to change potentially how I do security for the DoD data centers and specifically the DISA data centers. Taking those lessons learned because I'm not necessarily focused on the same sort of sets of sensors that I've been using. I'm using different things, system logs, application logs, access logs, etc., to better understand what's happening within the data center as well as what's happening within the commercial cloud providers' environment. And I can spend less time on what I'll call the sort of traditional ones, the traditional approaches that are in truth losing some of their ability to do what they used to be able to do 3, 5, 7 years ago.
How can industry help you in this area?
So industry needs to continue looking at things like how do I integrate across a hybrid cloud situation? So I may have some of my information, some of my data in a SaaS application hosted in a commercial cloud. I may have some of that same data hosted within my data center. I may have the same application running on both. I may be interacting with both. I currently still have separate infrastructures, separate feeds, separate API sources, separate languages to describe the information I'm getting from those environments that then have to be put together and synthesized into a complete picture as to where there are issues, where there are problems, which side of that equation I might need to provide information to so they can take corrective actions associated with that.
Thank you. So Jim, what would you consider your greatest challenge in the area of risk management today?
As I thought about that one, Patrice, I really kind of have, there's kind of 5 or 4 that are kind of co-equal. The first one has to do with the fact that in spite of all your best efforts, the commercial solutions we deploy are not developed with secure computing in mind. Last year, my division patched 40,000 criticals and highs. At one time, 100 people were deployed full-time doing remediation. And often the problems had to do with the fact that you all have chosen, for whatever reason, to put open source software in there. That open source stuff is buggy, and there's sometimes a reluctance to fix it. And I have to say this, Patrice, that's not acceptable. In fact, we had one vendor who said the patch wouldn't come until October, and this was January, and I said, fine, I'll find another vendor who sells the same solution that will get it faster. And it turns out they were able to deliver it to me much more quickly. Because I cannot live for 9 months, because our solutions are the control and management plane for DISA services. And we cannot tolerate that kind of behavior. So I would say the first one is one you all own. If you're going to choose to use software, you need to have a plan to patch it quickly. In fact, I'm looking at some solutions in the contracting area that won't allow us to buy contract software that you're not prepared to support to deal with the new reality of an unsafe internet. That's what we have to. That's the first one. The second one has to do with the fact that in many cases my particular scans are done over the OOBs that run to the very edge of the universe. Obviously, Patrice is the owner of those capabilities, but she's scanning HBSS and ACAS in locations that are 10,000, 20 miles, route miles away from the central servers. But they're done over OOBs that were built in a pre-scanning era, where if we aren't careful, she can take down the network by scanning incorrectly. So we have a very tight little time kind of a system. That would be the second is the fact that we're scanning. The scans have overrun our current solutions, although we are working to replace those. It'll be a couple of years before they're all gone. Third thing is multiple domains. Is because we have CIPRNet and NIPRNet, and then there's some other domains, so we have so it's kind of it's correlation of the problem. So if I have a problem on one domain, it's then rolling it out in multiple places. And the last thing has to do with the fact that technology does not stand still. So while I might be pretty far along on creating a management solution, somebody else, maybe Michael over here, is saying, "Nah, I got to have this new capability." And so while I'm still trying to sustain things that we're trying to get rid of, Michael needs a desperate capability. So the answer is there is a wealth of opportunities. So how does industry help? Industry helps by, number one, following good, secure, safe, secure coding practices. We need that kind of commitment from industry across the board, because frankly, we aren't the only beneficiary. If you can attack me, you can attack Bank of America, you can attack anybody else. So the things you do to fix me should be things you should be interested in for your own customers. And the next thing is we may have found out during our forecast industry, we're looking at a recompete of some of our small business solutions that would look for. Well, we're certainly pleased with our current solution providers. We also know the technology and capabilities move forward, and we would look for the industry vigorously competing and bringing new methods of addressing those kinds of capabilities. So I would say that's probably the two that we would look for industry to help us with in my risk management challenges.
And Mike, how would you answer that question? I mean, you've got all these application systems that you're trying to manage on a daily basis.
I would say the top two would be insider threat and technical support contract turnover. As technical support contracts turn over, you lose sometimes your best people, sometimes you lose an entire group. That's a real risk. You build up a core of knowledge, and as those turn over, that is a risk to being able to manage and maintain, patch, secure. So those are things that really affect.
Yep. And Dave, where would you say your top risks are?
So my top risk is the things we don't know about. It's in having adversaries come into the system and they're already there, and having no real way of knowing they're there. So one of the things that ties into all of the discussion is being able to have a clearer visibility of the configuration of the network. One of the things we find is you end up with a lot of people, you end up with a lot of people scanning DoD networks. They're scanning all the networks. And there's no real way to stop it. Fortunately, it only becomes a problem if they're overloading a resource, and that's usually euphemistically known as a denial of service. But the real time you have a problem is when somebody comes in and actually changes configuration items someplace. Unfortunately, with the size of the networks we're talking about, the size of the computing assets and everything else, you're talking about a huge configuration item tracking problem. And trying to do that with a manual process, with people trying to figure out what's going on, it's just not going to work within the resource-constrained environment we're in. So having the ability to understand that, highlight which configuration changes in a broad, diverse network environment are authorized changes and which ones are not authorized changes, and highlight those unauthorized changes. If we can get to the point of understanding that on a routine basis quickly, well, that will probably solve a lot of my problems.
So, JT, I know you're doing a lot of work, again, and one of the things we brought up earlier is upfront, that design space, and really addressing more of the risk at that point in time. And I know you're doing a lot of work to evolve our development process and how we deal with risk on the backside. Can you talk a little to that?
Sure. So, in fact, that's probably where we are. It's the biggest change that DISA has undertaken is that our agency director and the key senior leaders, Mr. Montemoreno, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Rivera, and the rest of the team, have committed themselves to creating a unified framework. I mentioned earlier, but a unified framework by itself is just a grand idea. We've had that for a long time. The difference is that we are bringing an architectural approach, UML modeling. We use a tool now for integrated modeling, but we started off with understanding who our operational users are through the OV1 process. We got SV1s, which look at what are the systems, both from the systems from a management perspective and the systems from the customer perspective. There's two different views that have to be addressed. And then that OV5A, the decomposition tree, which looks at the work functions. So we've crafted that complete view. As we did that, we coupled it with an audit of the agency processes, so we know what all the work is, and we know what all the systems are. Now that we do that, we then create this unified architecture, but unified architecture, again, are just a nice word. You can read it out of any textbook and write up a great proposal for it. The difference is that we have started, and I have started, and we're continuing to do that, and we started moving closer to the customer. I've already set aside part of money in one of my contracts where we are going to set up a DevOps cell out at DISA Global. Because I think, because as you probably know, when you're doing NetOps solutions, if you don't get user buy-in, you're going to have a failure. So the best way to get user buy-in is by finding a way to include the user in the development process itself. Obviously, that's either whether you're using Scrum or you're using a DevOps, because technically they're different. Or the answer is we don't really care what the names of the works are. We want to go to a spiral sprint approach, looking at minimal usable capabilities, and then moving forward from there. So, but moving to DISA Global would be the first step. I would work with Michael's team to make sure we've crafted a similar approach dealing with the data centers, and as well as especially as DISA becomes a enterprise service partner for the agencies, those locations would include getting outside the DISA boundaries. So I would offer that the critical component is getting closer to your customer by focusing on intimately on, because I have customers like you have customers. In fact, what distinguishes us from many of your conferences is that all three of us are business persons. All four of us actually are business persons. We have revenue streams we have to meet. We look for better, faster, cheaper, because we do need to reduce our cost to our customers. So DevOps is the thing that we have to figure out. Obviously, we're going to change how we buy. In some cases, when we buy things, I would buy them, for instance, and then we've talked about this in our forecast industry, where I would buy a solution, have that solution deployed, and then turned over to a small business to sustain. That way we're able to take care of our technology needs while at the same time honoring our commitment to the small businesses of this great country to be able to sustain it. That's kind of a fair way to split the work up, and we'll see how that works out depending on each individual source selection. Another area is the use of cloud, both mil cloud and as the private sector gets further along, I can see moving some of my development and even potentially production systems into commercial cloud, whether it's in a DISA, a DoD data center, or any one of the FedRAMP approved clouds. We would certainly see that as an opportunity, because frankly, the more I can move into a generic or commodity-based compute environment, recognizing it has to meet the security guidance, it enables us to be able to spin up faster and turn down faster. So we certainly are working with our partners, Michael's team, to figure out how to do that. And then the last thing I'd add, Patrice, is the term I'm going to call appification. There's too much of what you go into an ops center or a data center now, and you'll see big walls of glass, or people sitting there staring up at 8 or 9 screens trying to figure out how to manage their world. In the future, I see more and more of some of that detailed work being automated, and the management information displayed on a DISA mobile device, either classified or unclassified, depending on the domain that you're managing. But we would see, and I call appification, it's really that mentality, because remember, what makes apps useful to you? They do simple functions very well. There's an app on the new iPhone, it's called Workflow, that takes all of your life and just a bunch of buttons you push, and it can bring it up. So I would look at those, so from a perspective of how does industry help? Industry helps, first of all, by helping me understand by bringing on vendors who understand intimately DevOps and bring a practice, because anybody can read a book about DevOps, but DevOps is really a practice, a lifestyle, and so we would look for vendors who have that approach as part of it. The changing how we buy, looking at again, industry partners that can not only can build tools, but have partnerships with the development community that can roll things out quickly in a fixed price kind of basis and in a fly-off kind of role. They're so confident in their pricing and in their solutions that they can say, yes, we'll do that in a fixed price kind of basis for you because we know we can do it. And clearly, I'm a best value guy. Make no mistake. We're not buying commodities here in most cases. We're buying highly customizable solutions, and I'm a best value kind of person. And then finally, we're looking for tools that come with application modules that allow us to simply configure what we see on the screen, obviously configured for the smaller portal size. It's one thing to have a 4x8 monitor where you're looking at an iPad-sized screen, but it does expect that we see, so that in the end, we would like to be able to manage our networks and our systems from any spot on the earth. If something goes wrong, Mike's team could fall in the local Panera Bread and continue to operate and sustain their capabilities. And in that world, what we've done then effectively is the term I use, automate everything but leadership. I've heard it before. Leadership will always be required, and we expect to provide leaders those decisions. So we can, and our target then is to free up scarce resources for some higher value-added solution where human ingenuity is still desperately needed to go after some of the really hard problems that often don't get dealt with because we're spending resources on simple things that can be automated. That's what I would offer and I think what I'm doing is indicative of many of the other program managers throughout the agency. Well, I get this talk. What you're hearing me say is I'm representing dozens and dozens of other division chiefs and branch chiefs and developers who are doing the same thing. I just get the privilege of speaking and discussing it for you today. Thank you, Patrice, for that question.
That was very good. And I'm going to throw the curveball at Mike. So I think some of the things JT was just talking about, again, the speed, development, and with the application. I know you're doing some work that you're looking at how to do the whole patching cycle quicker, looking at closed loop.
Closed loop compliance.
Yes. Do you want to talk a little about those?
As we move farther, I don't see the government end strength growing. It's probably going to shrink in workload. We'll always be asked to do more with less. Closed loop compliance, automatically find it, open a change request, go through the change process, tell the tool when to fix it, have the tool fix it, validate that it was fixed, and run your scan again. The end result would be that SAs would be SAs. They wouldn't be patch people. They wouldn't be configuration people. They would actually be doing technical SA work, troubleshooting, performance, predictive maintenance, looking at event logs, looking and saying what is going to fail so that I can fix it before an application goes down. Closed loop compliance is really a method that has several purposes. A, overtime. If the tool can patch it at night, you're not paying people to come in. It's also goes back to somewhat insider threat. How many problems do we have with systems and applications because of a human error? Automation allows humans to make errors on a much larger scale, but when you automate goodness, then you can eliminate a lot of human error. And that is something that we have to look at as we move further into the future.
So I think you've heard kind of that standard theme here, cheaper, faster, better. So as Mike and JT, and actually Dave, I think we've all talked about the fact that we really have a mandate from a line of business perspective to figure out ways to become more efficient, more effective, reduce that cost to the mission partner, that program office that's paying for the service. We're trying to get better, again, provide additional services quicker to our mission partner. And I said earlier, speed. How fast can we know something? How fast can we attack that and make the change? Those are really the key takeaway here, where we're going as the cyber services line of business. So what are your questions?
John Marcy with Netmaker Communications. I'm curious if you guys have taken the time to talk to the likes of AT&T and Verizon on the carrier side, not the federal sales side, because they have these same challenges that they're answering today. They have unified data architectures. They're doing sophisticated analytics and cyber defense. Mm-hmm. They're managing a converged wireless MPLS environment. It seems to me that there's a lot to be learned instead of operating like a Fortune 500 IT department, but embrace being a carrier.
So first thing we did there is within our GSMO contract, we in fact looked for a vendor who would specifically do that. And while I'm not going to mention the particular companies, we have in fact brought several innovations into we can't count them into the operating system, and they obviously have a major. Our prime integrator has one of our national carriers as a key sub. So we in fact have clearly designed our acquisitions and are, in fact, incorporating, I would offer the cyber kill chain was brought in on that acquisition, which was a commercial best practice. And if you were to look at and it's public domain, you can look at the RFP still in FedBizOps, that it talks about the solutions that were brought in that capability. And so in that sense, we're bringing in threat intelligence. There are other opportunities. So I would offer that DISA, while we don't always talk about where our data sources are coming from, the way we've contracted, and I know that what's done on the data center side, they're some national vendors as well who are in fact bringing those capabilities in there. Many of the people exhibiting here are helping us by building their expertise into our contract support. So the government does the boring stuff, writes the performance specs, does the test to make sure but most of what we provide comes at its core from industry and incorporating those best practices. And we just take advantage of them and kind of roll with the tide, recognizing that we are the government. We do have to make decisions, and in some cases we go different directions. So that's a good question. Talk to many of these people here. They'll tell you their role in bringing in these national products. Mike, what are some examples you would have of where we're taking advantage of private sector expertise by building it into your contracts?
So with patching, some of our patching solutions and the automation we're looking at is coming straight from private sector. I am probably alone that I'm not a fan of GOTS. I think that commercial off the shelf is the way to go, and if I can find a COTS solution, I always say, how are the Fortune 50 doing this? Because there's not a lot of times that in a data center that you're reinventing the world, And
I would say from a computing perspective, from ecosystem and cyber line of business, we're definitely getting out, talking to industry, looking at the way data centers in the our industry partners are doing things to really learn how to do our cyber defenses better.
So, what other question? Over here that asked a question, I think. Yes. Over in the middle section, about 3 or 4 rows back.
Okay. Come on down.
This is a question, please.
No, but he raised his hand.
George Bell, just government civilian. Just a quick question, because when you
step a little closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry.
You got to eat it.
When you look at the break-ins and stuff that happened, like OPM, Target, Athena, it wasn't like a technical failure. I don't know if you really call it insider threat, but it was things like password reuse and stuff like that. So, I think it's good that you're talking about all these technical solutions. I haven't seen you really address how you intend to stop essentially misconfigurations, insider threats, and stuff like that.
So I think that a lot of what you're looking at there, of course, training is always one of the things that's tossed out, but automation is also key to that, as well as your configuration scanning and using multiple tools. Whether cyber has a suite of tools that they use, and operations has a suite of tools that they use to ensure that misconfigurations are found and fixed rapidly. Same thing with passwords, looking at traffic to look for unencrypted passwords. So you're really looking at trying to eliminate human error, and that's one of the toughest things, whether it's intentional or unintentional.
And then you would add to it is that we have rapidly moved out this year with PKI almost across the board. We are working on trying to do single sign-on, although we're not doing that yet. We're starting to move in that direction in many cases for the single sign-on on the DISA side for many parts, but for the underlying solutions, we're not there yet. Account automation management, and that coming with account automation management comes the whole suite of management solutions that allow us to more tightly manage our privileged user access, because that's why you do AAM, is to more tightly manage that whole and automate the entire process of account creation. So I think that there are some things we've done in the few cases where we've left passwords in place. It's been because there are some disadvantaged users we have out there in disadvantaged locations being supported by Windows XP for which there is no PKI or two-factor using a secure ID token RSA kind of solution. So I think that DISA is in a much better place this year on the actual operational aspects of, frankly, eliminating passwords.
So you bring up a very interesting point. As you mentioned, there's only so much the technical part can do. There's a couple of interesting, remember I mentioned configuration, control and configuration, visibility configuration changes. So everybody knows there's a DoD instruction for just about anything that happens in a DoD. Okay, there's an instruction for what grade of toilet paper you put on a ship. There's an instruction for what color to paint the engine room of a submarine. I know that because I drove submarines for 20 years. There is no instruction in DoD for how to do configuration management and control in an IT system. Now, I say that because there are some things like configuration management of ship systems and mil standard, mil spec, and all that stuff does exist. But there's no clear thought process at the senior leadership level to put a policy together that says this is how you manage configurations in an IT, now cyber environment, a cyber domain. So that's one of the problems. One of the other problems you run that's not a technical problem, we talked a little bit about acquisition lifecycle. The fact that acquisitions and the way you set up contracts can be as far behind the power curve as a year or more between the time you put it together, the time it finally gets awarded, and the time the contract executes. Right? So there's a lot of those. One additional problem that we are looking at is in DoD, because we have so many different entities, 53 different components in DoD. And 53 components who all have their own, historically built up over the last 30 years or so, their own IT infrastructures, their own cyber structures, their own processes, their own procedures, everything else. So we stood up the Joint Force Headquarters-dodin in Cybercom before that to try and start getting after some of that problem. But you run, and even to the point of declaring cyber a warfighting domain, but you run into some things in the cyber domain that you don't have in some of the other domains. Right? Cyber domain affects and is deeply ingrained in all the other domains. There's a lot more dependencies in the cyber domain between organizations and between functions than in the maritime domain, the air domain, and things like that. The ability to control those interdependencies in those domains is fairly simple, compared to trying to decide who's got what responsibilities for an application hosted in a DISA data center owned by another component and protected by a third component. And one of the challenges that we're really running into, which is not a technical one, is trying to figure out how do I, with all these interactions, get a coherent unity of action to affect change within a DoD environment that's upwards of 5 million endpoints. And that's one of the other key things that's ongoing in parallel with the discussions we're having today. Hope that helps.
I do. I have kind of a follow-up, which forgive me, I didn't think to ask. That's part of this is since you have a heavy reliance upon contracting, so if you think back to the OPM break-in and how that happened, it wasn't a failure on OPM, more or less OPM's part. It's the fact that they were contracting in the subcontractor. Mm-hmm. So how do you, since you have such a heavy reliance upon contracting, how do you intend to enforce, some form of compliance? How do you intend to police any contracts that you may or may not write?
Well,
and I'll sit down.
And I have a bunch of them, and I know Mike has a bunch more. And first of all, there's a level of trust that must exist. Number two, we, at least for the management plane, we've built it as almost exclusively as a private IP space, so it's not a routable address. And then we obviously have the firewalls in there that if somebody tries to put a routable address in there, it obviously gets eaten up by the firewall. So I would offer that we, and the third thing is, at least in my solutions, they're all developed in government facilities, most of it in the JITIC lab, so that we with a separate entity who receives it and manages and uses it, so that there is kind of a level, at least in my current solution, 3 different vendors involved in operating things. There's the development vendor, there's the test and deploy vendor, and then there's the acceptor and operate vendor. Now that has some challenges that will get addressed probably the next round of contracts. But in the end, we trust our people, and we try to create an environment where they would want to work and maybe not betray the trust and confidence that the American people have placed in them. Because in the end, while there have been some recent breaches that were in fact contractor-based, there are some in the past that were not. So I would offer that nobody has a lock on integrity. We have to learn to trust, and we have to create environments that make honoring that trust easier to do.
And I would also add, part of that whole continuous monitoring process, I mean, we put controls in place, we go back, we do continual assessment. We are looking for those types of problems, and we see a systemic problem, then we address it, and it's on a continual basis. We're always under audit. We really are.
And Patrice is the auditor, so.
So I guess we have about a minute left, and to think I thought we wouldn't spend enough time, right? So I do appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Please feel free to follow up with any of us. We're here to really answer your questions, and just keep remembering that faster, cheaper, better. Anything you can do to help us with that, we appreciate. Thank you.